Afternoon. My name is Drew Pieprzyk. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Development for Hologic. I look after our diagnostics business over international from a geographic perspective. I'm super excited to be here today with this group that I've gotten to know over the last week and a half. Very passionate about AI and the opportunities for transformation. One of the things we've discussed is we are all aligned and fully believe in the opportunity for transformation. But we're going to take a step down from a pragmatic standpoint into some areas that are of interest on how to get from where we are today to really enable that transformation. Because AI and diagnostics is a huge topic. And across the panel, we range from colorectal cancer to stroke to mental health, all different types of AI and all different sorts of challenges. I was speaking with Joe Mullins the other day, and navigating AI in the marketplace is like navigating in the Bermuda Triangle. For those of you that know what it is you know that it's there. You don't really know what's inside, but you have to go through. And on the other side is that transformation. So that's really what we're going to focus on today. And there's a few themes that we have teased out that we thought you guys would appreciate. One is around credibility and transparency, and this is both to the HCP and the patient, especially in the world of data privacy. The trade-offs in terms of your product scope and profile. You might have a discrete application of AI, but that's required or only works within a much larger care delivery ecosystem. So how do you work through all of those nuances? And that feeds into really what's your revenue model? As an innovator, as a business leader, how do you take your discrete operation or your AI model, if it's part of a bigger ecosystem, and thinking about revenue generation, short-term versus value creation, long-term, and navigating a lot of those aspects. And I'll have some from a strategic standpoint, some lenses there of what we look at, and then we'll invite Dr. Gunn from a venture capital perspective to do that. And ultimately, as I've gotten to know this group, this is going to be just a tremendous dialogue up here because we've all agreed that we can probably have an 8-hour session on the Bermuda Triangle, depending on how you define those corners. So super excited for our discussion today, team. So with that, guys, why don't we start a little bit on what we've described as doctor versus bot, right? Credibility and transparency. And I know, Dror, you and I talked a lot about this. So maybe you can give some perspective on, what is our responsibility to doctors and patients.
Yeah, I think, so first of all, I'm Dror Zur. I'm the CEO of Magentiq Eye. We have an automatic polyp detection system for colonoscopy, which works in real time. I think one of the main things in AI is the data set. And a lot depends on the data set itself. And it's important, as our responsibility from the industry towards the doctor and the patients and the regulator to be transparent with regard to that, to show on what type of data the AI model has been trained, tested, that we took into consideration all the aspects of the application that we are developing. And and to show that, and if there are limitations, so also to present them, so everybody can know this AI model will be very good in this, but maybe you have to be careful or not to use it for that and stuff like that.
And I think that brings up, and for those of you that were here yesterday, I was on the women's health panel, and we talk a lot about health disparities, right? And your initial data selection, right, if used outside of your use case, could lead to generalization, exacerbation, or false alarms, or false readings. So I think there's an opportunity in that transformation, and I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on that, on how companies, depending on their application, choose that initial data set, communicate that, but also build that to be more inclusive in the future. And that might be a roadmap thing. So, I know Pau, or especially David in mental health, how have you thought about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's a couple of different questions built into that. So I'll start backwards. I'm the CEO and founder of Senseye. We're a startup based in Austin, Texas, essentially working on building the first diagnostics for behavioral health. I think candidly, I think the inclusive question is actually relatively straightforward. Like I don't think it's rocket science. Like we know all the different, like when we're looking at a certain indication, we know all the different demographics that it affects. And I think building a data set that's inclusive is as simple as just going and collecting data from a very diverse population and being really intentional about it. I'm not trying to discount the difficulties that may come with it, and in certain types of disease areas there are difficulties to try and build a very diverse data set, but I think like the answer is just very simply that. And at least like in our experience with the FDA as we've been working with them, they have started to take a much more, they like to talk about things that are recommendations but not requirements, but really it's a requirement. But they've kind of at least with us around conditions such as PTSD, they've taken a very intentional approach of what does the market research kind of say is the population in the real world that actually, is actually affected by these particular disorders, and then what parts of the population do we suspect suffers from these disorders, but it's severely underdiagnosed, and then making sure that we actually are intentionally enrolling those folks, into our trials, both as we're building a data set and training on it, and then also from the validation perspective of it. And for in our space, in terms of the kind of AI, I think it's a different dynamic from spaces such as oncology, because we're not trying to augment or replace an existing process. There's currently no diagnostics in mental health. It's all based on these very pen and paper approaches. If you ask a patient a couple of questions, and based off of their answers, you come to some sort of a diagnosis, and the majority of the time it's wrong, or you get a certain piece of it. So you diagnose them correctly with anxiety or depression, but most mental health patients have anxiety or depression comorbid with whatever the actual issue is, and so you kind of are missing what's actually going on. And so for us, it's been really important to kind of generate a reference standard, and actually find these different silver standards in the field that we're able to kind of put together to form a proper ground truth. And then in a lot of our communications with the patients as well as the clinicians, kind of make it explicitly clear that we're not trying to replace them with AI. We're just trying to, for once, build a very powerful diagnostic for the space, put it in their hands, and then if they're able to more quickly and accurately figure out what a patient's actually suffering from, it will then allow them to kind of, figure out the treatment side of things, which is where they're really effective, in a much more efficient manner.
Yeah. No, actually, I totally agree with both of you. And something I would add on that is the importance of that post-market follow-up, right? So you can define this data set that is representative. I mean, it's never representative enough. I mean, you would need huge amounts of data to validate that. But I think that post-market follow-up is very, very useful to actually see how this is evolving and try to adapt if that's the case. So that's one point. On top of that, the AI typically for us is a product to triage a stroke from a plain CT without contrast. And the idea is that this is a triage tool that needs to be combined with clinical exploration, right? So each center may have different criteria on how to combine both things. So we as companies, we need to focus on the AI, but also on how do we deploy our technology and how is of best use for the physicians.
I agree, and I would like to add maybe something from about the beginning and then for later on, how we cope with the variety in the data. So for example, in our case, in colonoscopy, we knew quite from the beginning, based on studies that were done and also from talks with the doctor, that colonoscopy is being done quite similarly in all over the world, and there's no really dependency on geographics or demography. But what we were debating about is the influence of the different colonoscopy devices, how it will influence on us the data that we collect from different devices, and we have also, the system has to work with these devices. So we had something like two options, for example, whether to have a specific version for each device, and then maybe to train a general model, and then to fine-tune it to each device, or to train on all the data as a mix, and then to test it. And you don't know at the beginning what to do. You don't know what is the right, so you have to, what is the right answer. So we had to try. We ended up with a version which is actually a model which works with all the colonoscopy devices. And to show that it really works well, we did subgroup analysis to show that with the different devices, the results are similar. Like there's no device with which the data, the performance on its data is poor, stuff like that. So this is an example of how to take consideration maybe with regard to the data and to cope with it towards the performance and the post-market after that and stuff like that.
So on the data piece, and Dr. Gunn would love your opinion on this, from the VC and strategic side. We've heard reference to the FDA, right? And again, from a geographic perspective, that's already a target population for your data. As you think about broader opportunities for your platforms and your technology, how do you think about geographic expansion, right? And how does that impact your data set as you move through those phases?
I mean, one important part, obviously, when you get the application to the US, I mean, you need US data, at least half of it, and the same thing in Europe. However, the one important part is the clearance. But then you need to do sub-studies across the world in different areas that really support. I mean, it's not about just having the FDA or just having the CE mark. It needs to be consistent across different regions. And that comes along with a post-market follow-up, right? So it can be in a way of post-market follow-up, but different studies. All this data that you gather is what is relevant and what builds trust with the physicians. So that's fundamental, not necessarily in the FDA or in the CE mark.
Well, yeah, so I mean, in a broader perspective, I would say how the data is inclusive, diverse, large, then it makes the result more precise. So defining the first data as inclusive, as big, as diverse is the best way to go to the precise solution. But on the other hand, we are talking about the solution, we are talking about solutions that is actually progressing every day. So in AI and in machine learning, the end product is getting learning from the data that we put it. So I agree with the sub-datas and subdivisions, but in the beginning, how big and how strong the data defines the whole process actually in a more healthier way.
Yeah, good. And knowing the audience is probably more on the industry side. For me, one of the takeaways is both market evolution and when you think about big data and AI, is the importance of the capability of medical and scientific affairs in your organization, right? That needs to be strong, right? We talked earlier at lunch around statisticians on the team. How you go about designing that data and then conducting those clinical trials becomes even more important as you're in market and continue through. And I think that's been some areas that, from an industry perspective, I feel a lot of organizations can probably do better in that evidence generation, and there are gaps in that one. And there's a fine balance there for sure, because you want speed of innovation with evidence-based medicine. And some of those large-scale data studies are often expensive. So that gets into another question. So maybe I'll pause. Is there anything anyone wants to add?
I maybe can add one more thing. I mean, related to what both of you have said.
I love
like
it.
about the learning based on the data, because and the responsibility. I think there is the issue because theoretically, for example, we could learn from the data online. You know what I mean? Like the AI system could learn from the data online, but then there's a question of responsibility. Do we want to allow AI model to learn online, and then it is with less supervision and stuff like that? And I think, at least from what I know, I probably don't know all the aspects of all the options, but at least from what I know, most of the systems, do not learn like on the ground, on the field. We collect data in an ordered way. We supervise the data that we collect, and then we train the AI model in offline, and then we release it in a very controlled way and stuff like that, like a software version, as we did in the past, but just AI. So this is maybe an additional aspect.
All right. So I'm going to change gears a little bit. Pau, you and I have talked a bit around, and you inferred to this earlier, around AI as a task, right? Doing something quite discreetly, but the delivery of that value through an ecosystem. And I know this is front of mind for you relative to your business, and it's a little bit different than Dror Zur is in real time. So maybe share, kind of your view of navigating that Bermuda Triangle within your business.
Absolutely. So actually, when the first applications in AI for stroke, the idea is that, in our case, it started with contrast imaging, advanced imaging, and then they created these communication systems to allow to coordinate healthcare systems. I would say is as important, the AI and the coordination system. And most of the companies tend to become this platform, this one-stop shop with all the AI. The thing is that to scale worldwide and rapidly is really complicated to build your own communication system and try to spread these worldwide. So something that we thought is, instead of developing another communication system, we've integrated a CT scan viewer, a DICOM viewer within Microsoft Teams. We don't want a communication system in 2,000 hospitals, we want it in 100,000. So you focus as a company in the AI. What are we solving? The best AI possible with everything that we said, but then let's partner, let's not reinvent the wheel, let's find a communication system or a way that we can leverage. And that was very important for us. Then you need to see the different synergies. And then the other aspect, in particular in stroke, is a complex workflow, right? Because you have the radiologist, the neurologist, the interventionist. So there are many different ways in which you can support. And we forget about the IT department when it's becoming more and more relevant. So you can convince the physicians, but then you need to go through cybersecurity, you need to go to compliance, you need to monitor all of that. So let's leverage on what is existing out there. Because at the end of the day, for us, AI needs to be affordable and needs to be scalable. Otherwise, we are investing the money in reinventing the wheel, and we're going nowhere. So hopefully we're successful in this endeavor.
David, how do you see that in mental health and your application?
In terms of the business model, or in terms of?
Yeah, the business model, and how do you plug into that ecosystem, right? Is when you think about a segment in healthcare that is ripe for transformation, right? We were talking as it's very paper-based and a little subjective in diagnostics today, right? And you're now coming in on a clinical level with AI in a very enhanced, probably mobile-based system. So you've got quite a bridge to cross from that perspective.
Yeah, and the reason why I brought the business model is we've kind of learned, as everyone here knows, it's like you can have the best deployment mechanism in the world or the worst, but it has to also, we've kind of been trying to working backwards to figure out what the incentive structures in mental health are, and figuring out how to plug it in a way that clinicians can use it, but also will allow us to actually get paid. So our thought process has been, we're being regulated as a Class 2 medical device, but we're 100% software. Basically, it's a app that works on a mobile phone, and so we've been trying to figure out how to take advantage of the fact that we're software and the way that we deploy, while also kind of hitting inside of the existing ecosystem. And so what we tried to figure out was find if there's aggregators of mental health patients that have much larger clusters of patients, instead of selling directly to the providers. Because the kind of traditional issue in the mental health space, about 75% of all mental health in the United States is diagnosed and treated exclusively inside of primary care. And primary care in the US is a little bit too fragmented. And so what we basically discovered was that about 80% of all mental health interactions between provider and patient is occurring on telehealth. And post-COVID, it's the only area of telehealth usage in the US where the numbers are still going up. Because it's a patient population that traditionally does not want to show up in person. And so, and that's everything from your general doctor who just has a Zoom account to a lot of these more specialty platforms like Talkspace, BetterHelp, Hologic, and so on and so forth. And so our thought process was, and I think it's like in a very similar manner, rather than trying to build a standalone app and scale it, we've built our product as a software development kit. So basically serves as a, as a app inside of an app. So our customers are essentially the telehealth platforms. We serve as a plugin inside of their platform. And so, as you're hopping on for a therapy session or a psychiatry session or whatever it may be, you log on, 5 minutes ahead of time. The Senseye test will launch inside of that existing environment. You'll take our test, and then at the point of time that the provider shows up, they'll, essentially receive a diagnosis. And so that's kind of, that's not, we still don't think that's the perfect way of doing it, but for at least kind of our initial launch, it allows us to kind of fit into the existing clinical workflow, at least for the majority of those interactions.
So in these two use cases, Pau and David, thinking your initial assumptions on your business model and revenue ramp to what you know now, what are a couple of lessons as you think about interacting with strategics like myself or VCs, or as you think about the expectations of your business? So taking the business model and applying the expectations to revenue. What are a couple lessons we can share or observations?
So I would say in our case, the most effective treatment in stroke is the endovascular treatment, which basically is removing the clot from the brain. And actually is a very cost-effective treatment, but only, I think is 1 in 14 patients have access to that, right? So our thought is, how can you focus on basic imaging, basic modality, and technological scalability? And the AI doesn't need to be perfect, it needs to be good enough, and in combination with the physicians to do more treatments. So in our case, medical device companies can benefit of more treatments. And we believe that's the way to go. We need to make it, again, affordable, we need to make it scalable, and we need to work with medical device companies to really make sure that every single part of the world has access to those treatments. So that's the way we can partner with medical device companies or pharmaceutical companies or whoever.
Yeah, I can add that I think really in order to make it affordable or to make it beneficial for the company, for the investors, and for the customers. So we really want, as has been said, we want it to be prevalent, we want it to be scalable and stuff like that. So I think there are several things that we can think of. For example, first of all, of course, the performance. You want the performance to be good enough so it will be beneficial. But then things like what I've mentioned before, like to make it, in our case, in colonoscopy, to work with all the colonoscopy device, to be agnostic, and then you can deploy it in more places and stuff like that. And then also, as David mentioned, I think it's important to think from the beginning about integration in the clinical flow of the doctor. You don't want to change the clinical flow. You want to analyze from the beginning. We are talking, at least in our case, but I think most of the diagnostic system are decision support system. You want to support the doctor in the clinical flow that they have and not to change it. So you would like to analyze the clinical flow that they have and to see how you integrate your decision support comments with the existing clinical flow. And then, of course, the business model. In our case, for example, we found that a leasing model or subscription is beneficial for all, to all sides. Like you're talking about ARR, like recurring revenues, and also it's something new, and then you don't have to buy a device. I mean, from the customer point of view, like the physician, you can lease or subscribe, and then try it. As a company, we do, of course, the best to have customer retention, to keep them, but they have the option, and then they like it and stuff like that. So you have to think about a business model also that will help you to attract clients and to be beneficial for you and for your investors.
You guys all have discrete users. You get into an account, right? Or you might have a physician using your technology. But all of your revenue is based off repeat usage, right? How do you make sure they are using it more and more once it's installed? Thinking about the compliance to use or growth in the share of those cases, to your point earlier.
So the way we see it, have in mind the stage of our company. So we passed from a research company to have the CE mark and being cleared. Now we're growing the organization. Actually, we hired 5 new people to focus particularly in the customer success. We've been thinking through this a lot. It's not like hiring a sales team that is apart. We like that the same person that actually comes from the clinical evidence and the relationship you build, potentially with these medical device companies, but the relationship we build with the physicians, and you combine them all the process, right? So you spend time with them, and it's even more important the customer success than the sales itself. I'd rather focus in a small group of hospitals that performs well, and you are with them. You also learn a lot, and that's fundamental before you scale, because if you scale too quick and the solution is not consistent or whatever, you may have issues. So I think that the customer success part is crucial.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think customer success is a very important function in the company. We have it as part, for example, as part of operation. We're beginning now to work on it, but I think it's very smart what you have said, really. I think you don't have to look for very rapid scale up and stuff like that before first, try your system, get the feedback from your customer, from initial customer, see what you have to fix, and we always have to fix things, and make your product easy to use, and then, push it to a scale up. And we also, I think there's also a mechanism to do, to follow up, like post-market surveys and stuff like that, to follow about the use of the system. Yeah.
Actually, if I may add, is something interesting. The customer success role is not easy to find, right? So we've hired several people with several backgrounds, and we're trying to define these best practices. So you can start hiring somebody that has a lot of experience in clinical studies, because at the end of the day, you're doing clinical studies as a way to start engaging. Then you have somebody that is more expert in technical implementation, because you need to get the implementation done. Then you have a salesperson that shows you or medical affairs. So we try to hire people that have like common values, what is important for us, but at the same time bring different angles. And we want to train them to all go end to end, because we need one person to answer the needs of that system. Either if it's technical, then we have our specialized units, but you need one person to understand everything to a certain level, because if not, it's too complex to manage the relationship with but we're implementing it, so we see if we do it right.
So I look at the audience here, and the AI and diagnostics, it's broad, and I think what you just said is important. The opportunities for transformation are broad in the clinical sense, but they also are deep in the delivery sense. So how do you prioritize one or two of those areas in those earliest stages?
In particular, I would say, I think that more than prioritizing, it's difficult to prioritize it, to be honest. I think that you stick with a small group of people that is diverse, and you try to adapt, and because prioritizations change over time. So you need to prioritize, but you need to adapt, and you solve one piece, then you focus on the other one, then you need to go back. So it's not a clear answer for me of what you need to focus in particular. It may evolve.
Dr. Gunn, perspective from you, because you probably have a lot of companies come across your desk at all stages that you review. What are the 2 or 3 things that you look at relative to their thinking, their maturity, that would qualify them for investment, or the feedback you would give based on their thinking?
So I think since we're a CVC, the corporate venture capital arm of our fund, the most important thing for us is the strategic angle of the company. Like if it's a good strategic fit, then it's a good investment. But besides from that, I think team is very important. IP and tech is also very important. And like the market entry, like if the company can go into market or scale up, is also important regarding business models and everything.
I think the market is a very important thing. I can talk not from the VC point of view, but from the entrepreneur point of view. And I think what I recommend is for everyone who begins or want to begin or something like that, is really to look maybe on a few things, to see that you have an unmet need, that you're really going to solve something, that. and then it's like a painful point, for the customer that you're targeting at. And then to see, I think in many cases it's important that there is a technological challenge, because you don't want, okay, you found an unmet need, but you don't want that anyone can do it immediately. You want to have a technological challenge and to see that you can have an advantage there, when going to solve it. And then the market, I think you have to see that you already have a business case and to look that the market is big. In our case, for example, we have did analysis, and now but we didn't know much, I must say. Now we know much better. But the colonoscopy market, or the endoscopy market, but also the colonoscopy is very big. And we now understand that, for example, AI in colonoscopy or endoscopy has prospect of more than $2 billion or something like that. And this is on top of the money that is now rolling in the area without AI and stuff like that. So so I think it's important to choose a market which would be beneficial. It will make your life easier, your investor will be happier, and stuff like that.
What problem would you solve next if you weren't the CEO of the company you are today?
Oh, I see.
I have a few of my questions that I didn't give you guys originally.
Interesting. Yeah, it definitely will be in the healthcare, because I think it's. I will tell you what I don't know what exactly it would be, but it will be, as I said, something that that first of all to find an unmet need, probably in the healthcare domain, and something that will make good, for people, for the world, that really helps. And then, I will have to check that really there's a business case and technological challenge and stuff like that. I guess this will be the priorities that I will give.
Actually, you raised a very good point, right? Because we often discuss with the team, okay, what's the vision of the company and what are we really trying to achieve? And at the end of the day, our vision is to unlock life-saving treatments. How can we simplify the imaging modalities so that you can enable more treatments? We decided to focus in stroke because it's important, because non-contrast, because we can do more endovascular treatments, more intravenous treatments. But if you think about other areas, is how can we simplify the imaging modalities? We discussed a bit on mammography, for example, and these are things that we need to explore. It's not a matter of building AI for the sake of building AI. It's not a matter of becoming a platform for the sake of becoming a platform. You need to look at the medical need, and you need to pursue that, because ultimately we want to become a team that is capable to manage these challenges from a clinical regulatory standpoint without losing the perspective of the medical need. If not, I believe that we're all trying to chase the best that we can, because it's a struggle. What are the revenue streams? Where do we need to go? Who do we need to partner? We all partner with everybody, but at the end of the day, we don't generate the revenues because they're not paying enough. Nobody's paying. Okay, let's go to the basis. Let's go to increase the treatments and to simplify that process.
Yeah. I recently finished my MBA, recently completed my MBA, so I have a lot of ideas when it comes to how to impact and everything. But if I wear my physician hat and if I answer this, I think if we add anything to the mainstream clinical application, and if we just shorten the time of diagnosis or increase the population to reach a treatment or a diagnosis, or saving a time in the physician's office for a patient, then the impact of it is huge. So even like small things make a big difference in this area.
I agree. And from one of our perspectives, and if you guys didn't hear yesterday, the Women's Health Index, the cancer burden around the world is coming from low and middle income countries where they don't have technology at all, right? So the promise of AI delivering more affordable solutions that can get to where the patient is, to get a good enough outcome to make sure they don't get into trouble later, it puts us on a different trajectory from a total health perspective. So we often think about, and I like what we talked about yesterday, is incremental to what we have, but maybe only 30% of the global population has access to what we have today. So from a transformational perspective, how do you cross into populations that don't even take or have access to what we take almost advantage of today from where we are? And that's one of the big areas for me, particularly for AI and diagnostics, that we can look at all of the technological innovation that's coming, but how do we apply that to populations that don't have even the basics, the good enough that we have today? And that the impact on that disease burden will be massive. So, and I'd love to hear your perspective on mental health. This has been a topic in my world for a few years on a personal level, but it was a little taboo for a long time, right? Coming out of COVID, I think it's been easier to talk about. So how many, what's your aspirations there, David?
Yeah, and honestly, I think COVID gave the people that were already talking about mental health like a bit of a louder voice, but at least in the circles I run in, I still think it's just as taboo as it was before.
Yeah.
Like especially outside of the United States. And like I think like we're a bit more relaxed in how we talk about depression or anxiety, but anything more severe than that, I think, is like still as taboo as it gets, if not more taboo. And we don't need to go into that today, but I have a lot of, I think like my personal opinion is that mental health will be stigmatized until the point that inpatient mental health care gets kind of stripped down and rebuilt. Because it's like, as long as we basically treat inpatient mental health care from like in every way, shape, and form like a prison, it's going to be as stigmatized as things are now. And I think that's not necessarily what Senseye is doing, but I think from like a general mental health space, if you can rebuild inpatient mental health care, that is how you can kind of slowly start to strip the stigma away. But in terms of like what we're trying to do in mental health, like the way we think about the mental health space is that the way we both manage and diagnose patients today is basically the equivalent of diagnosing someone with diabetes, but you never measure their blood sugar, which seems pretty ridiculous, but that's effectively the standard of care. And I use that analog for a couple of reasons. Because the same way it's very simple by measuring someone's blood if they have diabetes or not, it actually has always been that simple to understand if someone is suffering from some sort of mental health indication as well. The problem is you've needed a functional MRI, it's very expensive, and so we've never been able to do it in a scalable manner. And so what we're trying to do at Senseye is essentially build the first diagnostics and severity monitoring tools for mental health. Our initial focus is on anxiety, depression, and PTSD. And we're not trying to replace the clinicians. We just think that we have very powerful treatments available in this space. They're very effective, but the actual matching never happens. And so if we can put really powerful measurement tools in the hands of the providers in the space, that will allow them to kind of actually understand what a patient is happening and kind of start to solve the mental health crisis patient by patient with an actual understanding of what they're suffering from.
The vision you all have is amazing and aspirational and inspirational. And I think I speak for the panel today. The opportunities are abound. How we get there becomes the formula that I think we're all trying to solve. And in the end, even just our conversations over the last few days is we're stronger together. So talk to your colleagues. It's the power of meetings like this. It's the power of networking, because no one entity is going to do this transformation on its own. It is complex inherently on a technological level, but even more so on a delivery level. So guys, thank you so much for everything. It's been fantastic. And guys, thank you.